Hello, this webinar is all about missing from the census, how to find people that are missing from the census or that you think are missing from the census. They're not in the census, it's a familiar cry from the genealogist, but are the people you're looking for really missing, or are they just hard to find? Remember that the information that's given in the census might not be completely accurate, and some people completely misunderstood the questions and gave some very peculiar answers. So you might be able to find people that you think are missing because they're not really, but sometimes they might be genuinely missing, in which case I do have a few suggestions for how you might find the information that would be in the census if they were in there to be found. The first thing to remember is less is more. When you're searching online, which is how most of us look at the census these days, you'll see very inviting looking boxes to fill in lots of details. And you should resist the temptation to fill in all of these boxes, or even half of them. We're looking here at the main search boxes on Find My Past and on Ancestry. Those are our two partner sites for the census records. You will find the census on other sites as well. But the same kind of rules apply. If you're speaking to a human and you're asking them to help you find some information, the more you tell them, the more it helps. The more information they've got, they can work out what the likely answer might be. But when you're looking on a database like this, it doesn't work like that. If you're giving a lot of information to a computer, you will only confuse it if you give it too much. The computer is very fast and it's very efficient. It's very stupid. So it will take everything that you say very, very literally. So if you put in a piece of information which is more or less right, it isn't exactly what is in the database, then it will reject it. So even if you know everything about a person, you might have their birth certificate sitting on the table next to you, but if you put in all the perfectly accurate information from that, you might fail to find them in the census because the information in the census is maybe not quite the same as is on the birth certificate. So that's the first thing to remember. I would generally start with no more than the person's first name, no middle names, just the first name and their last name, and maybe an approximate year of birth. And it should be approximate because a lot of ages in the census are out by a year or two. If you get a really large number of results, then you might want to refine it a bit. But I would always start with the bare minimum and then try and narrow it down from there. Now, some of the information in the census you can find using some wildcards, and that's quite useful where you've got names that have variant spellings. And the general convention is that a question mark will stand for a single character in a name. That's useful if you've got a surname that maybe has a vowel in it, but it could be pretty much any vowel. You can use just the question mark for that. But the asterisk, which will stand for any number of characters or no characters at all, that's generally more useful. So that's what I use most of the time if I'm doing wildcard searches. Now that's a general rule and it won't always apply to every kind of search. It does depend on what the search engine is capable of. Sometimes you might not be able to use a wildcard at the very beginning of a word or more than one or two characters in. So you may need to experiment a bit, but those are the general rules. If you're searching for information other than name and approximate age, you can use birthplace, but it's a very, very tricky thing to use because the birthplace on the census, and remember this is what somebody wrote down, the information that somebody volunteered, they didn't select it from a list. That might be perfectly accurate, and your version of where they were born might also be perfectly accurate. But again, if they don't match, then they're not going to come up in your results. And I've just got a few examples here. The very first one, we've got some of these very typical helpful birthplace informations, which is like London. Well, that's really useful because London's an awfully big place, and ideally you'd want something that narrowed it down a little bit. The middle example is really going to the other extreme. and you've got an actual street address, which is unnecessarily detailed, helpful, but you're not necessarily going to find that, because you probably wouldn't think of putting down 92 Avondale Square, Old Kent Road in the birthplace field, because it's not what you'd expect to find. And the final one, which I particularly like, someone who was born at sea, doesn't just say at sea, you've got the precise compass bearing of where they were born. Again, useful information when you find it, but it's not something you can sensibly use to search by. And now here's another example of information where you've got some fairly dodgy birthplaces, a lot of NKs, which is not known. But it's worse than that, because if you look at the names column, you have a lot of people who are just listed by an initial and a surname, or a couple of initials. You will often find this in places like lodging houses, which is what this is, where the proprietor of the lodging house is putting down all the information, and they can only put down the information that they've got from their lodgers, and that might not be particularly helpful or accurate. And if the place in question is an inn or a pub, and you have people who've been drinking there all night and then stay for the night, their answers might not be the most accurate that you would hope for. So that's just a couple of examples. This one, well, you're not going to find your ancestors, obviously, but you kind of hope you find your in-laws' ancestors. Prisons and places like the House of Detention here, you don't get any names at all. You just get the initials. So you don't even have a surname. Some nice detailed occupations and birthplaces, and the ages might be accurate, but you'd be doing very well to find somebody just using their initials. So that's another potential hazard, and another reason why you might not find somebody even though you put in perfectly accurate information. And then there's the question of age. Every census year, in the supposedly humorous magazines like Punch, you will get cartoons much like this. They're usually having a pop at women lying about their ages, although I have seen similar ones for men who are vain about their ages. Sadly, it is true and absolutely verifiable that women consistently have lied about their ages. If you look at the statistical returns, the number of women in their 20s in one census is not really matched by the number that are 10 years older and in their 30s in the next census. There's always a little bit of a bulge that way. So I always allow at least a year either side of the year I think somebody was born, and sometimes you might need to do even more than that. And that's where people are deliberately either lying about their age, or they genuinely don't know exactly how old they are, and they give you an answer that is close but not quite right. But then there's a different kind of problem. When you're searching the census, and you're either searching by age or you're looking at the results to see what sort of ages come up, to see if any of them are about the right age of the person you want. And this is where you're at the mercy of whoever has been transcribing the census. And there are three lovely examples here. Now that top one there, the head of the household, and who is an annuitant, unmarried, is actually 66, but this was transcribed as 106. And when you look at it, you can make 106 out of it, even though 66 is much the more probable answer. And then the next one below that, you've got a servant who is actually aged 27, which you can see if you look at some of the other twos on that page. I've only showed a snippet here, but if you look at the whole page, it's very obvious. But looking at just that one in isolation, that two does look quite a lot like a 9. But I think you'll find that not many people would employ a servant who was 97 years old. So I'd go for the 27 here. But again, it's transcribed as 97. And then the one at the bottom, the artist is 45 years old, not 115. You have to look very closely, and you can see that the bottom stroke of the 4 is exactly on the printed horizontal line. So it is 45, but it does look like 115. And again, that's how it was originally transcribed on one site. So these are just 3 examples, and it didn't take me very long to find these 3 to show you. So this is the sort of thing that you can look out for, and that's the reason you might want to search without an age at all, just in case you've got some sort of odd transcription like that. This is one of my favourites. This is Albert Square in the East End of London in 1871, and the returns there are a little on the patchy side because it's well, it doesn't say what the establishment was, but the head of the household was described as brothel keeper, so you can work it out from there. And the details about the various men who are mainly sailors and the other inhabitants, the female inhabitants, are described as fallen, an abbreviation for fallen women, nice Victorian term there. And the enumerator helpfully puts a comment at the bottom of the page, which is quite hard to read, but it says these fallen women very often don't know either the ages or something else, which I still can't read, of the men who spent the night with them, therefore they're only guessed at, or words to that effect. That's an extreme case, but it's a good reminder that the person filling in the details of somebody else in their household, they might not know the information, might be making their best guess. Here's another kind of thing that you might find, and this has nothing to do with somebody transcribing it badly or giving wrong information. This is for a family which I know quite a lot about, and you can see that they're there at 93 Lisson Grove, and their surname is very, very clearly Wyatt, and you get lots of shots of that because the enumerator has written the surname down on every line. That's a bonus. Very often they will just ditto it. So you only get one shot at the surname, and if that's hard to read, and somebody gets it wrong, then all the rest of the family will be listed under the wrong name. So this is a really clear piece of writing. However, this is what the enumerator copied from the household schedule that the head of the household, Mr. John Odom Wyatt, would have filled in. And here is the same family, still at 93 Lisson Grove, and you can see that their surname, it's not particularly clear, but the husband and the wife have got their names written out in full, and you can see that it is definitely Wyatt and not Hyatt. And I promise you it is Wyatt because I've researched this family. I know an awful lot about them. So you could search until the cows came home looking for Mr. and Mrs. Wyatt in the other census year, but you wouldn't find them because the enumerator has copied their details down wrongly. So we're always very quick to blame the transcribers who work for the commercial firms. But sometimes it's not their fault. That was transcribed perfectly, just transcribed perfectly, wrong information. And that comes to the whole business of how do you spell your surname. Now this is some nice examples from one particular person, part of a family that I researched many years ago, and it did strike me that as spelling variants go, this was an exceptionally good one. The person concerned, he's just a child in the first, in the top example, but the surname is next to his father's name. And in 1861, it is Havyard, Haveyard. And then in 1881, there he is with his own family, and the surname is almost the same, but the H has gone, it's Havyard. And then in 1891, and again, it's the same family because he has a very distinctive first name, which is the main, and he very kindly married a woman called Dorinda. So they're fairly easy to spot, but it's the same people and their surname this time. The H is back, but instead of AVE, it's ALF, so it's Havyard. And I got so interested in this that I looked at some other sources, and I found this man, and this is the various different ways that his surname is spelled at his birth, his baptism, so 2 different spellings for almost the same event in the same year. And then when he married, it's become a Hargard, and I have no idea how that came about, except it's a function of people copying things that are written down, and sometimes it's a function of people writing down what they've heard. This is in Yorkshire, and I'm not going to attempt a Yorkshire accent, but if you try and think of someone in the north, someone in Yorkshire pronouncing avyard and half yard, they sound different in my southern accent, but in a northern accent they're very, very similar. So try to think of the way something looks when it's written down and how somebody might have copied it. And I think that's how Hargard came about, because I can't make it sound like any of the others. But the others, all the other variations, they probably sound much the same. And people didn't necessarily have a particularly fixed idea about how their name was spelled. They may not have had to write it down very much, and even if they did, they might not have cared, and they might not have been literate in the first place. So if you tell somebody what your name is, and they say, "Oh, how do you spell that?" You might say, "I have no idea, I can't read and write." So names do change, so it's worth trying a few different approaches to see how something might be spelled and how it might appear when it's written down. And as you get to know a particular name, you will get to know the particular weird variations and the odd misspellings that other people make of it. Now, sometimes the information that's in the census itself, quite apart from spellings and ages and so on, sometimes the information there is just completely wrong. And in this one case, I think it's because the people filling in the household schedule just didn't quite understand the instructions and made a bit of a mess of it. And it's the family that's right down the very bottom of this page. And I'm showing you the detail here, just of their names and their ages. Now, it's headed by Emma Weston, so far so good. She's the head, widow, sorry, and she's 36 years old. That's fine. But then the next person is called Sarah Ann Parkinson, and it is a misspelling. This woman's name was Parkinson with an I, but she's down as mother, and relationship is meant to be relation to the head of the household. Well, she could be Emma Weston's mother, and she's also a widow, except that she's 25 years old. So if she's Emma Weston's mother, she can't be 25. And if she's 25, she can't be Emma Weston's mother. So that's a puzzle. And then just the extra details, the person at the bottom, which is spelled Breates, her name is actually Beatrice. Again, it's a family I've done some research on, so I know what it's meant to say. And she is described as the granddaughter. And again, she's very unlikely to be the granddaughter of the head of the household. What I think has happened here is that she is, somebody has, they've read some of the instructions and they've got a bit confused. And then they've tried to write something down that makes sense and ended up with something that makes no sense. This may be worth pointing out that this is in Maidstone, and at that time in Maidstone there literally was a pub on almost every corner, and I'm saying no more than that. The real answer to this one is that Emma Weston and Sarah Ann Parkinson, they were sisters. And Sarah Ann Parkinson was the mother of Beatrice Parkinson, not the grandmother. So I've tried to work out how they might have come up with those precise results, and I still can't make any sense of it. So you may find that somebody in your family has done something a little bit weird like that. That is certainly not the only example I've found. I found an even better one in my own family. That one's quite enough to be going on with. Another thing that you might want to do, and I strongly suggest you do when you can't find somebody, and you've tried all the suggestions that I've already made, is try a different site. If you're subscribed to one site, whether it's Find My Past or Ancestry or one of the other sites that have got the census on, try using a different site. We can get very comfortable and get very used to the way a particular site works, and we may be very fond of using that and be reluctant to try a different one, but it is often worth doing, because whenever you have two different sets of people indexing the same material, you will get differences, because where it's really, really clear and easy to transcribe, it'll probably be identical. But where bits of the writing are a little bit fuzzy, a bit difficult to read, or the information is a bit ambiguous, you will get differences of opinion on how it should be transcribed. And sometimes the site that you've been using has got it wrong, and the site that you don't normally use has actually come up trumps. And I would never say that one site is any better than another, because I've used several different sites and they all make blunders sometimes, and they sometimes come up trumps and have the best transcription. So even if you think that somewhere is normally very good, maybe it is, but it might just have fallen down on the one that you really, really want. The other reason is that even if the information is identical in the transcription, different sites may allow slightly different kinds of searches, and they might be more helpful for the particular thing that you want to do. And it's always worth trying at intervals to do this, because sites do from time to time change the way their search engine works, and they sometimes improve it. One of the things that one site has done has radically improved the way you can use wildcards. It used to be very, very difficult to use wildcards on Ancestry at one point, because you couldn't use it right at the beginning of a word, but now you can. Certainly you can in the Census. So that's made a tremendous difference. And there are all sorts of other things that a site might do. It might just make its search forms a bit more user-friendly, or it might add a field that you can search on. So it's always worth just going back and having another look, just in case the functionality of the site has improved. And the other thing that you might spot is that the image quality can vary. Sometimes, particularly the early census years, you will find that the quality of the images, which have been scanned from the microfilm, which in turn was done often several decades ago, the thing that you're seeing on the screen might be quite hard to read. But if you try another site, you will sometimes find that they've had a better quality image. Sometimes a site may have rather good image editing software, and that can actually bring out things which are very, very hard to read even on the master copy of the microfilm. But they they have very clever machines that can see things that the human eye can't, and they can sometimes bring out details that weren't previously visible to the naked eye. So that can help, and that can also help them make a better transcription. If their transcribers can read the image better, then they have a better chance at transcribing something accurately. And there's also another approach that you can take, although it's always very, very important to look at the image, because a transcription will only be what somebody else thinks it says. And they might be very good, but you really want to make your own judgment. You always want to look at the image. But sometimes using indexes which are not linked to images can be very helpful, because they might be very, very good indeed. And the site FreeCen is quite a good place to go and do this. Once you've got what you hope is the answer, then don't rely on the transcription, even the transcription of the household with lots of detail in it. Do go and look at the original, or at least the original image, just to satisfy yourself that it really does say what the transcribers think it said. And that's what the FreeCen search screen looks like. It's a sort of sister site to FreeBMD, which is much, much better known. But it's very well worth having a look at FreeCen to try and find something that you haven't found it easy, you haven't been able to find on a site that's complete with images. And to translate something from a site such as FreeCen, or possibly even from a printed index. A lot of family history societies have been producing census indexes for many, many decades, and some of those indexes are very, very good indeed. So if you can track one of those down, or sometimes the family history societies may still have them available for sale in booklet form or CDs or microfiche, or you might find them in a genealogical library, a local study centre. It's often worth looking at those. Just because we've got some really snazzy new tools doesn't mean discarding all the old ones. And what if you're using something like a printed index or an index without images, the way to find the image will be to use the census reference. That's usually how a good transcription will direct you to it. And I'm just going to show you a little bit here about what a census reference is. It used to be many years ago that to find anything in the census, you had to know how census references work. Otherwise, you couldn't find anything at all. You couldn't identify a roll of microfilm to take to your reader and to plough through to look for the village or the street that you were trying to find. Now you've got wonderful tools that will search by name, and that's pretty much what we expect most of the time, and that will parachute you straight to the right page. But then you might have a problem if you want to try and find it again, because you might not be able to remember exactly what search you did to get that particular result. So it's always worth learning how a census reference works and how to use it, because that will never change. Websites may come and go, but as soon as these census enumerators books were acquired by what was then the Public Record Office as original paper books, these references were created, and they are still the references. Now this one is from the 1891 census, and a reference starts with a series number, and you can see that down there. The series is RG12. That's, you know, it's the 1891 census. And a piece, this is a term that cataloguing term that we use in the National Archives. We've got lots and lots of other series, which RG12 is just one of them. And a piece number within a series is really what we could describe as an orderable unit. And that might be a book, folder, single sheet of paper. In the case of the census, it's usually a number of enumeration books, and that will direct you to a part of the census. It varies a bit from census year to census year. In 1851, the pieces are extremely large. In later census years, they're a bit smaller. But once you've got a piece, and you will see that this tag when you're looking at the census on microfilm, that tag with the series and piece number on, but without all my red markings all over it. You will see that on every frame of the census. It might be at the top or the bottom or on either side, but it will always be there on the census page. And then to get your precise page in the census, that's a little bit trickier. Though every page has got a page number, but the page number on its own isn't enough to find it, because a piece, although it varies in size, will usually consist of a number of different books. So if it's got 5 books in it, every book will have a page 1 and a page 2 and a page 3. So if you just give the page number, that's not narrowing it down to the right book. But when these books, as original paper books, came into the Public Record Office, they were given folio numbers, and the folio number is stamped on the top right-hand corner of every right-hand page of a double-page spread. So it's not on every image, it'll be on alternate images. In this case, I've shown you a page that actually has got a folio stamped on it. In this case, it's folio 156, and the page number there, which I've also circled, is 5. So this is folio 156, page 5. Now the next page on, which is page 6, that won't have a folio number stamped on it, but its reference would be folio 156, page 6. So a folio number is the really important one. Page number is a bonus. It will narrow you down to a single page, but if you've got a folio number, that will take you to a pair of pages, and that's pretty good. So the series, the piece, and the folio number are really important ones, and you will always be able to find something in the census by that. And then the worst thing you will have to do is look at 2 pages if you don't have a page number, but that's not too difficult. So that's how the census reference works, and it's a good idea to get in the habit of always noting the census reference, full reference of anything that you might want to find again, or give the information to somebody else so that they can find it. And you can certainly locate a page of the census using these references on both Ancestry and Find My Past. And obviously, if you happen to be using the microfilm or the microfiche, which some people may, obviously, if you happen to be using the microfilm or the microfiche, which some people may still have in a library or a record office. You will still be able to find it that way. There is another way that you can find a street in the census. This is what we used to have to do in the olden days when there weren't name indexes. And sometimes it's still a good idea, because you might literally want to be finding who was living at a particular address, or you might think, I've tried all these clever things, I can't find somebody by a name search. What tricks I use? So I'm going to do it the old-fashioned way and look at their address and see if there is somebody there that looks like the person I'm looking for, and maybe their name's been mistranscribed. That actually was how I found the Wyatt family masquerading as the Hyatt family, because I looked at the address I had for them, which helpfully was the same as in another census year. Now we have in the National Archives, we have typescript street indexes, which again use the census references that I just explained. So that's another reason for learning how to use them. And a number of years ago, we had a number of these indexes, not every single one, but quite a lot of them. We had them typed up into a database and put online. Now, they're now part of the government web archive, and we do have a link to where you can find these street indexes in our own online guide to census returns, because trying to give you a precise URL to get to this page would be horribly complicated. It's very, very long. But if you follow the link in our census guide, it will take you there, and then you can search where there is a street index. There isn't one for every town for every year. It's mainly for larger towns and villages. That you can search by census reference and by address. Now, it is possible to search by address on for some census years. You can certainly do this on every census year on Find My Past, and you can do it in some census years on Ancestry. But Ancestry have also got quite a useful field in their census search. In fact, a lot of their other searches, which is called keyword. So it may be worth putting a street name into the keyword search. Now, this isn't always going to work, but it can be a good way of getting you to the street address if you're using Ancestry and not Find My Past. And again, they may have transcribed something accurately and Find My Past may have got it wrong, or the other way around. So it's a number of different ways that you can locate a street. And another way that you can do find a street where there is no street index, or perhaps using the keyword hasn't worked, is you can browse by place. For places that are too small to have had a street index, and that was roughly places with about a population of about 40,000 or more, what you can do is browse through the title pages for all the enumeration districts, and hopefully, we won't always do this, but in most cases, it will have a list of the streets included in that district. So rather than scrolling through or clicking through every single page of 7 or 8 enumeration districts, you can look at the first page for each one and see whether the street that you want is included there, and then that's much easier than trawling through the whole thing. Again, it won't always work, because sometimes, particularly in early census years, you won't get a very detailed description. But in some cases you might do. And if you already know the geography of the place that you're looking at, that makes it that much easier, because you will recognise nearby streets and speed up the process a bit more. But that's quite a few hints for searching by place, which might help you find the person or the family that you want, where all the tips for searching by personal name haven't worked. This is something that won't help you find somebody in the census, but it might give you at least reassurance that it's not there to be found. Over the years, we've been able to accumulate information about bits of the census that we know are missing. Every census year has got some bits missing. Sometimes it's a whole enumeration district or even more. Very often it's just odd pages. For a variety of reasons, the 1861 census has suffered worse than any other census year. And although we can't replace the pages that are missing forever, by at least identifying where they would be, we can save people doing a lot of fruitless searches, or sometimes explain why you've tried everything you can and you still can't find the person you want. And if it turns out that they're in a district where about half of it is missing, you might just have to come to the conclusion that, oh, well, they're probably in that missing bit. At least I know it's missing, and you might go and try and do something more rewarding and carry on looking for something that probably doesn't find. What we have done is created a very big database of this, and a few years ago we were able to upload all of this information into Catalogue Discover, our online catalogue, and to find what's missing from any particular census year. You can do an advanced search, and if you put in the series code for the census you're interested in this case it's the 1861 census, which is RG9. So if you search within RG9, and search within is one of the fields on the advanced search, and then in the description, if you could ask it to search for the words missing or wanting. There is a technical difference between missing and wanting, and they weren't always used perfectly accurately. So if you put in both, that will find all of the bits, not all of the bits that are missing, but all of the bits that we know for certain are missing. This is still a work in progress. We still get people looking at a bit of census and saying, I think there are some pages missing, can you check this out? And sometimes we check it out and we say, sorry, those pages are genuinely missing. But if we didn't know that that little bit was missing before, we can then add it into the catalogue, and that's an ongoing process. Sometimes, and it does happen, it happened a few months ago, somebody reported that it looked as though a page was missing from a district that they were interested in, and when we looked at it, it turned out it wasn't missing. It had been invisible to the public gaze for several decades, because when that bit of census was filmed, the camera operator had accidentally turned over 2 pages at once. And we were able to go back and get the original book out and get the missing page images scanned and then uploaded onto the commercial sites that I got the census on. All because of one very sharp-eyed reader who was looking very carefully at a district and thought that the page was genuinely missing and alerted us. We were able to do that. That doesn't happen very often, but I'm sure it will happen again. And the general researching public are our eyes and ears in this regard. With all the millions of pages of all the censuses, we can't look at every single one in detail and check the missing pages. But all the family historians out there can do it for us. So if you do see that there is a page that you think it's genuinely missing, or you at least want to query it, you can send us a request, which will end up on my desk, but that's fine. It keeps me in a job. If you just contact us through our Contact Us page as a research inquiry, and just put the details on, and it will be looked at. And you will probably get the disappointing answer that, sorry, it's genuinely missing, but you might not. So if you weren't a born optimist, you could be a family historian. This is something else that can happen apart from pages being missing. And again, this is 1861. It's not just the census that has the most bits missing. It's the one that has the most damaged bits. And here's a nice example of a page where you've got the names excuse me, and the addresses, and quite a lot of information, but the right-hand bit is missing. So you're not going to really get anybody's birthplace, and you're losing a chunk of occupations. Well, that's a nuisance, but at least you've got something. But of course, for the reverse of that page, you've got occupations and birthplaces, no problem. But for the people on roughly the bottom half of the page, you have no idea what their names are. So that's something that you will find. Fortunately, not too often over the census as a whole. but there certainly are pages where there is literally only half of it left. That, as damaged pages go, that's actually one of the slightly better ones. I have seen far worse than that. So again, that is sometimes is a reason you might not find somebody. They're there, but their name isn't, so you can never be sure it's them. And another thing that you really should do is search in every census year. When we do family history, we are going backwards. And you find a family, you find your ancestor maybe it's an elderly person with children, and then you work back and you find them as a child with their own parents, and then you find their parents as children with their own parents. But you should always come forward as well, because even if you think you know quite a lot about a person, there might be some odd little detail that's in a later census, perhaps when they're an elderly widow parent with one of their children, that you hadn't picked up in another one. And in an extended family, there'll be, or even just a very large family, there'll be different family members present in different years as children are born, as they grow up and leave home, or even if some of the poor little things die young. You get a much better picture of the family if you try and find as many members of the family in as many censuses as you can. And I came across one example where I had a woman, a married woman, and she was in the census in the town of Wye, that's W-Y-E, in Kent. And I have her in about 3 census years, and I had great difficulty trying to find her birth, because in every census year she said that it's down that she was born in Wye. And it was only when I found her as a much older woman in a later census that she wasn't in Wye at the time. She'd moved away from there to another part of Kent. And then in her birthplace column, instead of saying Wye, Kent, it said Rye, Sussex. And I don't know if somebody had a speech impediment or was a bit deaf, but if somebody is in a particular town and they come from somewhere that sounds very like it, then the person filling in the details on the form, or even if it's a family member, they will tend to put down something that they're familiar with. I mean, if somebody, for example, lives in, comes from a place that has an unusual place name, or has a place name that is familiar for another part of the country. Kent is full of examples like this. And there is a very small part of Chatham in Kent, which is called Luton. Now, people who don't come from Chatham probably haven't heard of Luton. If you say Luton, you think of Luton, Bedfordshire. So it would be very easy for somebody from that part of Chatham, when asked their birthplace, to say Luton, and the person listening to assume that they meant Luton, Bedfordshire. There is also a Leeds in Kent, and a much more famous one in Yorkshire, and there is a Rainham in Kent, and a more famous one in Essex. Now, I know this because I used to live in Kent, so I'm fairly familiar with Kent place names. But you can probably do much the same for other places that you're quite familiar with. So there's a lot of misunderstanding. It's not that somebody was giving an enumerator slightly, or information that the enumerator misunderstood. It could be that several years before they had mentioned to someone in their family that they came from Luton or Rye or Leeds or Rainham, and that person misunderstood and immediately ascribed them to the wrong part of the country altogether. One of my great grandmothers came from a place called Bowness, which is part of Inverness, and in the census she is clearly down as Bowness and Linlithgow, which is several counties away in the wrong place altogether. So if you have a look in your own family and look at the places they came from and the places that you know, and you might well find similar misunderstandings like that. This is an example. This is in many ways my very favourite census, the 1911 census. And I've put it here not just because it's a very nice census that gives lots of information and where you see the household schedules, but there is one unique thing about the 1911 census for England and Wales, and it has a feature that I have seen in no other census at all in the British Isles, and it is the only one that gives, or at least supposedly gives, exact birthplaces in Ireland. The Irish 1901 and 1911 census is just county. To my great annoyance, the Scottish 1911 census doesn't give exact birthplaces in Ireland, just the fact of Ireland. You might get something more detailed, but all that was required was just Ireland. But the English 1911 did ask for the exact parish and county in Ireland. So if you have an Irish ancestor and they came from Ireland to England or Wales, and you haven't been able to figure out which part of Ireland they came from, it's worth coming forward and hoping that they managed to live long enough to be in 1911, or failing that, did they have a brother or sister who lived long enough to be in 1911. So 1911 could be the clue, your one breakthrough for finding an Irish birthplace, which is one of the hardest things to do. So that's one of the many reasons that I like 1911 census very much. So that's some of the ways that you might be able to find somebody in the census when maybe you thought you couldn't. But sometimes, for a number of reasons I've also given you, they might not be there to be found, or that census return might have been destroyed, never to be seen again. But you always should remember when you're doing family history that you're not looking for a particular document. What you want is the information that's on it. And if you can't get the document that you want, whether it's a birth certificate or a census return, try to think of other ways where you might find the information that you would hope to find in this non-existent record. If you're looking at the census, one of the things you want to find is how people are related to each other. You want to reconstruct a family. Now, it's very nice if you find a family with 2 parents and a whole bunch of children, maybe some in-laws thrown in for good measure. You can virtually do a family tree from that. But there are other ways you can do that, and wills are one of the best. This particular one is very, very long, and it's a man who had several children, and he very decently noted them down in quite a lot of detail and described exactly how they were related to him, as we mentioned, grandchildren, as being the sons or daughters of my son, so-and-so. This is quite important in wills, because if you have, if a man has 3 or 4 sons, and each one of them has a son named after him, he's got to be very specific that his grandson Thomas Gash is the son of his son Richard, or his son William, or his son Thomas, to distinguish him from other grandsons of the same name. So wills can be tremendously useful for this. In this particular case, as well as this very informative will, the death duty register entry that goes with this one is also very useful, because it's got dates of death. So his unmarried daughters who died many years after he did, but that's a subject for a completely different talk altogether. So don't get too focused on being determined to find that document, because there might be some alternatives. And I've certainly in the past spent ages looking for a census return before they were name indexed. And try as I might, I couldn't find it, because these Wexford people just kept moving in a very built-up area. But almost by accident, I found an application for poor relief, which gave all the detail that I would have found in the census and then some. So don't give up if the elusive census return that you've been pinning your hopes on doesn't exist, because you might be able to find that information somewhere else. There is a lot more information about the census in our online guide on census records, which has just recently been updated. So there's even more information in it than there was before. And that has links to how you can find the street indexes that I mentioned are now on the government web archive. And also we have a link to the blog post that I did about the subject of missing from the census, which repeats some of what I've said here, but you may get some other hints from there. So never give up. There might be an alternative. and do have a look at the census guide, because there might be a few hints in there that you hadn't previously thought of. So if at least a few people go away from this and try something that maybe they hadn't tried before, I'd say my work here is done. Thank you very much for listening.